लड़कियां ज़्यादा डेडिकेटेड है, बताइए, वो लोग जब गई हैं, आप लोग नहीं गए। कल्ट जो है थे, वाजपेयी जो है कम से कम एक ही लीडर थे ऐसे बीजेपी में जिसको हम कह सकते हैं लीडर थे। कह सकते हैं उस आई हैव सीन दैट फेलो, that the way he was doing politics, that was definitely different from the, and I think he was respected also in the same fashion, right? बिल्कुल करती थी। और कई ऐसे मौके हैं जब ऑपोजिशन में होने के बावजूद भी कांग्रेस ने उसको भेजा था बाहर देश कंट्री को रिप्रेजेंट करने के लिए। तो और अभी ठीक है, हमारे टाइम पे थे वो, और हमने कई बार उनको सुना है, ऐसा नहीं है। तो ठीक है, उनका राजनीति जो है थोड़ी जो है वो थी, ऊपर थी नॉर्मल पॉलिटिक्स से। तो वही है, ठीक है, अब क्या कर सकते हैं। लीडर्स वैसे ही होने चाहिए, इसमें कोई डाउट नहीं है। राइट, सो हम शुरू करते हैं। ठीक है, आज शायद थोड़ी क्लास छोटी लूँगा बिकॉज आई एम ऑल्सो नॉट फीलिंग वेल, राइट? सो मे बी it was commitment and that is why I did not want to cancel the class, because classes cancel करना कभी अच्छा नहीं होता, right? Anyways, right? So far at least we have seen few things regarding the Stone Age, right? And basically what we have tried to see, we have just tried to see the change in the weather condition, right? The changing pattern in the in the tools, right? That also we have tried to see. So there are few things that we tried to notice, and on the basis of that, and this is definitely their mode of survival, that is definitely marking one of the important change, among these communities, right? And somehow, we just try to understand that what kind of basic differences are there between Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic, right? So now the second thing which we need to understand, that is definitely the settlement patterns, right? So definitely I'll be just giving you some content on the settlement pattern. But before I'll tell you the settlement pattern, or before I'm dictating something on settlement pattern, let us try to understand which is not very a big deal also to understand, that if we'll try to understand the settlement patterns of the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic phase, so it is quite obvious and clear what were the areas which were preferred by them, right? So suppose if we are talking about the Paleolithic settlements, right? Suppose Paleolithic settlements, right? So if we are talking about the Paleolithic settlements, so let us make a map of India. हंसना नहीं है, ठीक है, सिंबॉलिक है ये। This is the weakest part of somehow it reflects India only, right? So suppose this is the India, right? And roughly you might have studied about some of basically the geographical features of India. So if you have studied the geographical features of India, in that case you must be knowing few of the things, right? What are the things which are very important? Let us first try to understand what kind of areas might have preferred by them. Definitely there were few natural resources available in these areas, and that's the reason that they preferred such kind of areas. So I just told you initially that what was the pattern in which they were making their tools, right? So I just told you that okay, normally they were just trying to break the the stone, and just by breaking the stone they were making their tools. So somehow they might have preferred such kind of areas where these kind of stone was available, right? There is a particular sort of stone, right? And in fact, if we'll talk about the Paleolithic cave, so basically quartzite stone, right? And the second was granite, right? So these two sort of stones were suitable to them, and that's the reason that they preferred those kind of areas where such kind of stones were available, right? So now if we'll try to apply the same idea, in that case, as you do know that this particular particular part is known for Shivalik range, right? So this is the Shivalik range, and in fact in some of the parts of Shivalik range you will find this quartzite and granite stone, and that is why it is quite obvious that some settlements of the Paleolithic people could be seen in these areas. I'll come to that later, right? The second thing which is very important, that the another thing which is very significant, that is known as, which range is that? Western Ghat, Vindhya range, right? This is Western Ghat, right? So this is not of our concern, right? The another thing which is very important, that is Aravali, right? And finally, so as you can understand, this at least Aravali and Vindhya range, there also we find this quartzite and granite stones, right? And the third thing that could be discussed here, this particular patch, right? Dakkan Plateau, right? Even in that plateau we do find that a sort of stone, and it is quite obvious to understand, it's quite easy to understand that these were the areas which were mostly preferred by them for the settlement areas, right? So somehow we can discuss okay, if we'll try to see particularly the Paleolithic settlements, so we'll find that some parts of Jammu and Kashmir, right, including certain parts of Uttarakhand, right? Apart from this, as you know that this is the Vindhya range, so basically they would not have preferred the completely hilly areas, right? Rather they preferred the valley areas, right? So valley, why would have then preferred the valley areas? So definitely there might be one reason that somehow they are getting the stones, but the stones could be available in the hilly areas. But at the same time, there were two more requirements because of what? They were not exactly settling on the hilly areas. They slightly preferred to settle down in the lower areas, slightly lower. That somehow that could be called as valley areas, right? So there were two other requirements somehow which motivated them to settle in such kind of areas, and of course the second was the food resources, right? So that was the second concern, and basically they preferred to settle in those areas where those animals were available that could be eaten, right? So basically they would have settled in completely forest areas or which are densely forest, so in those areas they might have to face some wild animals, right? But instead of that they preferred those areas from where they could get their foods, right? So those animals like such as deer, right, and such kind of animals were available, so they definitely preferred those areas, right? So that's the reason that we'll find that normally preferred the lower areas basically, right, in the seam, either this side, right, or this side, right? So this was the preferred, and the seam could be seen here, right? So they have normally preferred this area, and of course this area was quite suitable to them, right? So the second important thing which was which was important to them was definitely the food resources, right? And the third, definitely the water resources. Without water they could not survive, and for water definitely they would have preferred such areas where the water is easily available, right? So they must they might have preferred the lakes, right, because or the rivers which were flowing nearby, so they might have preferred those kind of areas as well, right? So somehow these were their compulsions, and because of what, there are few patches will find the areas of the Paleolithic settlements, and that is why this particular area which is known as Potwar Plateau of Shivalik, Potwar Plateau of Shivalik, and that is why some of the sites we do find in Kashmir region, Jammu and Kashmir, and some in Uttarakhand, right? Second, if you are coming, definitely this particular zone was very suitable to for their habitation, and that is why this particular part was also preferred by them. Specifically, this area which was falling in Madhya Pradesh, right, and Hosangabad district that I did discuss even in the last class. And apart from this Hosangabad district, certain areas in Rajasthan, right, such as Didwana and certain areas, these were from Rajasthan. So these were the other areas preferred by them, and most of the in fact the Madhya Pradesh area, basically the areas which were falling in Madhya Pradesh, was the most suitable zone for them, and that's the reason what happens the areas like the Bhimbetka, Hosangabad, Adamgarh, right? These were very popular sites which were preferred by them. And at the same side, time we can discuss about this particular patch, which was basically the Son Valley, right? Basically, I'm talking about the districts such as Mirzapur, which is closer to Allahabad, right? Because that was that was also falling on the basically the Vindhya range, right? And there also they could have access easily to the food resources, water resources, and of course stones, right? So that was the third patch that we can discuss, and of course this is continued till Madhya Pradesh and Jharkhand, and this is the next area which we can discuss that was very popular for their settlement. And in this particular area we can find that the area is as you do know that this is a plateau, right? And in this plateau the stones were very easily available, and at the same time you can discuss about certain rivers such as Tungabhadra, right? And here, sorry, I just missed to discuss that here it is basically about river Narmada also, right? So somehow Narmada was providing the another facilities to them, and in the same we can discuss for south, because in that plateau also basically Karnataka and Andhra region, right? There also certain rivers were available, Tungabhadra and Krishna, right? And apart from that, definitely these hilly areas could have provided them the stones on the basis of what they could make the tools. So these are certain areas that could be seen, right? Apart from that, some areas, right, which we don't know, particularly that why they would have preferred this area, but somehow we find certain sites in Odisha areas, right? This northeast, in the northeast, normally we don't find much sites, and I think you can understand the reason, because that area is known for heavy rainfall, dense forest, and I think this area would not have suited to them, and that's the reason that we don't find much site in the northeastern side, or basically the seven sister states. So there we find very less number of sites, but somehow these are the areas which were preferred by them, right? So whenever any question is coming on the settlement, so instead of focusing much on sites, right, you must focus on the regions, right, and the facilities which were available in those regions, right? And that's the most important part of your answer rather than any other thing, right? So you just write down something on settlement. The archaeologist have identified the sites of the Paleolithic people just a second. on the basis of Paleolithic tools although Paleolithic tools have been found in almost all parts of subcontinent, in almost all parts of the subcontinent, except the plain areas. Although some exceptional cases are there, for example, Kalpi, a Paleolithic, in bracket you just write down, a Paleolithic site, bracket close, in Ganga Valley. Or Ganga Plains, right? Change the paragraph. What happened? Ganga Valley, right? Change the paragraph. Even though it is quite easy to identify certain patches or zones where we find concentration of such sites. Which were definitely suitable for their habitation. The areas which have provided them certain basic requirements such as stones for making tools, comma, food resources, and water Normally, the areas where the quartzite and granite stones were available have been preferred by them as it was easy for them making tools from such stones. Change the paragraph. The early Paleolithic tools were fairly large core tools. I hope you remember that I did discuss in the last class. Core tools, right? Made of quartzite and granite stones. These tools include chopping tools, hand axe, and cleaver. CLEAVERS, cleavers. Change the paragraph. The first zone that could be discussed for their settlements, have been recently identified from the Potwar Plateau, and the Sivaliks. The second zone has been identified in Rajasthan nearby Sivalik range, Aravali, sorry. Aravali range, comma, Didwana is one of the most popular sites. From Gujarat, also some Paleolithic sites have been identified known as Hiran Valley. Hiran Valley. Hiran, Hiran, Hiran Valley. Change the paragraph. But the most prominent place for the Paleolithic settlements, which even continued in the later periods, could be seen with the Vindhyachal range, as it was much suitable for their habitation. Such settlements could be seen near Narmada and Mahanadi. The popular sites such as Bhimbetka, Adamgarh, Hosangabad, have shown regular habitation by such people. The hills near Bhimbetka and Adamgarh is made of quartzite stone, and of course the rivers like Narmada and the rivers like Narmada was providing them the fresh water. The archaeological evidences, the archaeological evidences clearly shows, evidences clearly show, sorry, the archaeological evidences clearly show the availability of those animals which could be consumed by them. The next important zone for the Paleolithic people was the southern plateau in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. And Karnataka. The rivers like Tungabhadra and Krishna, were fulfilling the prerequisite conditions for the habitation of Paleolithic people. Paleolithic people. Sorry? Yes, definitely these were existing. These are basically, look, whenever you will find any hilly areas, very frequently you will find the rivers, right? Because whenever any, and you must be knowing about Western Ghat and the Eastern Ghats, right? So if any hilly area is there, and as you do know that these rivers are not, basically you won't find the water in water throughout the year. Basically, mostly you'll find the water in the rainy seasons, right? So it's quite obvious that if any as such hill is there, so nearby you'll find so many sources of water. Recently, I visited, that place is called Lonavala, right? So Lonavala, if you have visited, you might have noticed one thing in Lonavala, wherever you'll see, you'll find the waterfalls. Right, these waterfalls are not very big, right? They are not very small waterfalls, but from every side you'll find that the waters are getting down, especially in rainy seasons, right? So it's a quite obvious thing. Whenever you find the hilly areas or the plates or like the plateaus and all, right, you'll find certain sources of water. So it's quite obvious, right? Okay. Next, change the paragraph. Apart from this, the Belan Valley. The Velan Valley of Belan, B-E-L-A-N, Velan Valley near Allahabad was another important zone for the Paleolithic people. But these areas, sorry, just cut this line. Right? Some sites even could be seen, some Paleolithic sites even could be seen in Odisha, and some Paleolithic sites even could be seen in Odisha, Chota Nagpur Plateau and West Bengal. But these sites are becoming prominent only during Mesolithic and Neolithic periods. Mesolithic and Neolithic period. That's it. They very simply sometimes they ask, discuss about the Paleolithic settlements, right? I think once they have asked this question, chances are very less, because this is a very straightforward question. But as I told you that if any such question is coming, you need to show certain, or you need to write certain analytical answers rather than just giving a simple description of the sites. It's better to write about, about the reasons because of what they would have preferred these areas for habitation. Got my point? Right. Now the next important thing, the Paleolithic lifeways, right? Give a next heading. Roughly, if I'll say, right, what kind of society was present during this Paleolithic period? That's the question, right? So what kind of assumption you guys can make regarding the Paleolithic society? One thing that we do know, that they were hunting and gathering people, right? That's the only thing we do know. So as far as this, a particular thing is there, definitely just by writing this, your answer won't be completed. Once you're talking about society, so it is not only about their economy, that I have already told you. Whenever the question is coming, any question is coming on the society, you need to discuss every aspects of society, right? Each and every aspects of society, right? So if we are talking about the society, so we need to understand about their polity, right? The first thing which is important. That thing is quite obvious that definitely these people would not be having any sort of political structure. And if these people would have been they definitely, if they would be having, right, any sort of political structure, so we people are completely unable to say about that, right? The first thing, you'll find that the political structure is getting more and more profound, right, or dominant only if some amount of surplus is coming into the society, because this is the idea which is somehow consolidating the concept of polity. Getting my point or not? Because whenever you talk about polity, right, it means that somehow there is an imagination of a person who was dominant, right? The person might be king, the person might be Sardar, right? The person might be anybody, right? But somehow there's definitely a fellow who is powerful, right? And if he is powerful, so in what terms he might be powerful? In fact, if we'll try to define powers, so you can try to define the powers in two different ways, right? And what are those ways, or what are the things on the basis of what you can talk about the power of any community? Money, right? So that is what I was just talking about, surplus. And there's another thing through which you can show the power, muscle power, right? These are the two means of power, nothing else. So that muscle power got a changed definition in the present scenario. Now it has become army and police, right? If somebody is controlling army and police, he is powerful, right? And if somebody is controlling money, he is powerful. Why the district magistrate or the DM has always been supposed to be, or always been considered very powerful? Very simple reason is there. Ultimately he is controlling both the things, right? And that is where the way it has been defined, that the district magistrate is eye, ear and every sense organ for the government or the governance, right? Why? Because without district magistrate, the person who is very powerful, the administration of this country cannot be run, right? And that fellow who is having both the powers, like the political, the money power and simultaneously the muscle power, right, or the police power, both the powers are with this fellow. And that is why there is a very common practice that they never appoint a DM for a longer period on a particular district. Very frequently they are being transferred. Why? Because if they are having both the rights, right, they have police power, they have of course they somehow they'll create a influence of there, right? And that is why they just wanted to discourage. The government always wanted to, want to discourage such kind of thing, practices, and that is why they very frequently, transfer them, right? So somehow these are two sort of powers. So whenever we talk about any head of any community, so these powers might be very important. So unfortunately, we find one thing, that both the powers were completely missing from this society, right? So that is why we can't discuss much about their polity, right? And the other thing which is very important in terms of history, that without having any literary source, it is very tough to define their power, because if there is any literary source, then it has written something about the headman of the community, right? And that's the reason that even though this is a very tribal community, this is a very much tribal community in a very proto stage, so we can't assume this thing, okay, they might not be having any political head. Maybe possible that they must be having a political head, right? It is not very surprising, but somehow we can assume this, right? But as we do know about Indus Valley civilization, we can't apply the same idea for Indus Valley civilization. Indus Valley civilization was full of resources, right? And definitely the notion of surplus was there, right? So definitely we very easily we can accept one point that they must be having a political power, right? But somehow we don't know about that. Why? Because the literary sources are completely missing. Getting my point or not, right? So that is why if there would be any political structure among such communities, we are at least not in a condition to say anything, right? So yes, that is why we cannot discuss much about the polity. Now what is the next section? Economy. Of course we can discuss about the economy, but I think their economy was not very much complex. They had a very simple economy, right? It was hunting and gathering, right? So that could be discussed, right? Okay, but as I told you, it is not very complex, right? There was no much trade and commerce, exchanges were not there, right? And mostly you'll find it was a sort of survival mode, right? Or subsistent economy, somehow they were just surviving, and that is why we can't much discuss about here, but definitely it is forming one important base for the society of these people, right? What else that could be discussed, right? What kind of bonding was there among them? That also could be discussed, right? Because if they were living in a community, there might be some force which ultimately would have bounded them, right? Or ultimately which might have attached them. So there might be some force, because the notion of family and some other things were definitely not there. And if these sort of concepts were not there, in that case it is very tough to discuss what kind of bonding forces were there among them, right? So that's the another thing that could be discussed. Of course, we can discuss some other things like status of women. That could be also discussed. What kind of status of of women was there? So these are few things that could be discussed for their society, right? But something which is more important than their society, then what are the sources on the basis of what would try to understand their society? Very clearly, we have very limited source to understand them, or their society, right? Why? Because we have very limited source which could tell us about their society, right? Because there was no concept of literary source, right? And as you do understand that literary sources are supposed to be the best sources to understand any society, because then only you can just by archaeological sources you can simply find out their their physical life, their material life, right? You can't discuss about the values and the practices and some other thing, and that is why it is very tough to reconstruct their So what are the sources which are being used by them? So many times I have told you that apart from these paintings that we have received, right, the other thing which is helping us, that is the anthropological studies, right? So whenever you are writing any answer on their lifestyle or their any other thing, right, you need to mention about the anthropological studies, right? So that is what we need to understand, right? Start writing. Puritan matlab? Acha, nature lover. Of course they were nature lover. I'll come to this point also. I'll just discuss this point, right? Okay, fine. The life ways of Paleolithic people, living in different parts of the subcontinent were based on their adaptation of their specific environment. However, there were some basic similarities in the lives of these hunting and gathering communities. Got the point? We can't generalize, right? Even though there might be certain similarities. So what we can discuss? The similarities. Getting my point or not? Right? So very simply, because ultimately it was all about their adaptation to their respective environments, right? If somebody is living in the Kashmir region, so definitely they would be having a different lifestyle, because that region was slightly colder, right? So of course their lifestyle will be different. The people, those who are living in Rajasthan area, they might be having different lifestyle. But even though we can talk about certain common features among such societies, and in fact we can just discuss about that, because ultimately it was based on, as I told you, some limited sources, right? Write down. The material remains of such societies do not tell us much about their life phase. Do not tell us much about their life phase, but the petroglyphs did you get the meaning of petroglyphs? The sketches which were made on any sort of surface, petroglyphs, right? Sketches on any surface. That could be anything. That may be stone, right? That may be the ostrich eggs, उस पे भी बनाते थे, शुतुरमुर्ग के अंडे पे, ठीक है? So that might be also, I mean these are known as petroglyphs, right? So what did you write? Can I see the sentence? Their life is, but the petroglyphs are giving some insight on their lives. But most of the petroglyphs were developed during the Upper Paleolithic period. The ethnographic studies, should I write? Ethnographic studies of modern hunter gatherers modern hunters gatherers can supplement the information from archaeology, although Caution, 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 has to be exercised while drawing parallels and conclusions. Got the point? Right? Definitely, it is very tough to know about them only on the basis of the physical remains. That is quite obvious, or the material remains. So that definitely we are supplementing from the paintings that we do find. But there again we have certain limitation. And what is the limitation that could be discussed here? In those paintings, normally we'll find that they have been basically it has been assumed that these were made only during the upper Paleolithic period. So whatever the paintings or the sketches that we do talk about, right, these were received only for the upper Paleolithic period. So somehow it is not giving a complete picture, right? So basically, as I told you, that the Paleolithic period is beginning from 2 lakh years ago, right? And this upper Paleolithic is beginning somewhere around 10,000 years ago, or from now on, from now you can say it was somewhere around 12 to 13,000 years ago, and that is why there's a huge difference. So you can't generalize okay, the same sort of life must be led by them as well. That could not be said, because ultimately, or we can say gradually, they were having some technological advancement in tools and their lifestyles, right, their belief system and some other things, right? So that is why now what is the another thing that could help us? That is the ethnographic studies, right? So I just told you what exactly the ethnographic study is. It's basically the anthropological study, and we just try to locate such kind of tribal communities, and that could be noticed in Africa, right, and Andaman Nicobar, right? And in fact now the government has also, in fact, instead of making them more advanced, government have also started preserving them, right? अंडमान अगर आप सब कभी गए होंगे, हाँ, जिसमें आप नहीं जा सकते, और कुछ अगर ऐसा भी है कि if you are crossing or if you are passing by from that route, you can't get down from your bus or car, right? So somehow now it has become so tough, because one of my friends, she was from Andaman, right? So when she was child, so when she always used to discuss with me, because I was always interested in such kind of communities. So she always told, she was from Bihar only, but somehow her father was posted there, right? So she used to tell us that very easily we could go to their villages, we could have seen them. So somehow these kind of things were happening. Now they have completely, these kind of things have been stopped, right? So as I am telling you, now if you are going, so if you are passing by those areas, you can't get down from your bus and car. So sometimes if you are lucky, you can find those people, right? So instead of getting them advanced, right, just bringing them to the modernity, the government have started preserving them, right? Because somehow it has been said that now these are some sort of heritage for us, right? And that is where the government has started protecting us. So as the people were also much concerned about their their survival, or the government is also very concerned for their survival, so somehow these communities are yet left, right? So of course we can talk about India for these kind of things, but definitely, as you do know, that Africa is going through definitely most of the countries in Africa, they are not much advanced, and in fact their lifestyle is very poor, and in those countries definitely the government also could not do much, and that is why such kind of communities are still surviving. So we just being very cautious, we try to select such communities and we try to observe them. I hope you must be knowing about, you might have heard about so many anthropologists, those who used to stay in those villages, they used to learn their language, right? Or they have just adopted their culture, right? And they are working with them, right? So somehow these kind of studies are very helpful to us to understand their lifestyle, and I hope you can understand that it is quite easy to understand the culture of the Paleolithic people if we find similar kind of people right now, because now the way they are leading their life, the way their belief system is there, so somehow it is quite easy to understand, and that is why we have started taking help a lot from such kind of studies, and that has become the base for our understanding of the right. Which novel? Heart of Darkness. Okay, I haven't gone through that novel. It is by any anthropologist? British writer.
He was depicting Nigerian village.
Nigerian?
Village, one village.
Okay.
He's just near the Congo River.
Acha.
So men from Europe just come there and become the king like.
Acha.
He just collected inside.
So it's a imaginary in a novel or?
Just historical type.
Acha, historical. Okay, I'll get the times. If I'll get time, I'll just read that novel. Might be interesting, right? So this is the basic framework, right? Sorry, this is the basic introduction. If any question that you are writing on the Paleolithic people, right? So you need to begin the answers in that way, right? Now you just start writing in certain points, right? First point, the Paleolithic people lived in shelters made of rock, branches, grass, leaves or reeds. Reed, anything which is hollow from inside, that is known. Normally, flute has also been called as reed, right? Sorry, REED, reed. More and less, continue that sentence only. More or less, permanent settlements can be identified and some sites represent specific kinds of activities. Habitation sites such as Bhimbetka and Hunsgi, Karnataka, are example of continuous habitation. Right? Now there are few things that you can understand, and you can just, if you find it important, you just note down in few words only, right? Look, if you think only they used to live on sites, that is not correct. They had multiple use of the sites basically, right? So I have discussed one thing. There were some sites which have been identified purely as factory sites, right? Do you remember that? In yesterday's class I did discuss about it. Exactly. So there were few sites where they did not used to live, right? They used to just make the tools. So they have developed the sites or the places as per their requirement. So there were some sites which are called as factory sites, right? So these are basically for tool making. You just note a word, right? Factory site. Factory, FACTORA, factory site, right? In the same way, we can discuss about some sites such as butchery sites. Butchery, butchery sites. I hope you got the point. What might be the use of this? So somehow their habitation was not only for living, right? At the same time, they have developed certain sites for some other purposes, right? And at the same time, I just told you that if you think that where they have made the paintings, basically, right? If you think these are the sites where they used to live, always, that is not correct, right? Sometimes you'll find that they did not used to live in those sites, and they have actually made it a sort of working platforms of the stations, right? So they had this specific pattern among them where they were supposed to make the painting, and for that they have identified certain sites. They were regularly going there, in those places, and they were making the pictures or the paintings, right? So we can talk about certain painting sites also. Now, the next point. The basic social structure of Paleolithic hunter-gatherers may have corresponded in some ways to what anthropologists call a band society. A band society. Now, what exactly is this band society? These societies are not compared with the modern day societies. These societies have been called by the anthropologists as band society, right? Normally, what is the maximum number of people that will find in the Paleolithic communities? That was not beyond 100, right? That is the maximum limit of any community, right? And now, why the anthropologists have called such kind of societies as band societies? So you must be knowing about bands, rock bands. In rock bands, you'll find certain members are there, 5, 6, 10, whatever it is, right? So suppose 10 members are there. Do you find any sort of emotional or social relationship among them? No. Why they are together then? For a particular purpose, right? And the same idea has been implied by the anthropologists here also, that the peoples were living together because of a common purpose, right? And they were actually specialized in some of the things. Get my point, right? Some might be very good in hunting, some might be very good in surrounding the animal, right? The way they were just trying to surround the animal, they might be very good in that, right? So they all the people had different kind of functions, right? And if somebody was not capable in doing that, in that case definitely he or she won't be part of the society, right? So in fact, as you do know, mostly the life expectancy was very less during that particular period, and that is why everybody had to play a certain role, a specific role, and because of their role in society they were part of the society, and that is why the term like band society has been used, because of their function, because of their work in the society, in the community, they were part of that, right? And that is why it has been called as a band society, where they were not sharing any sort of social or emotional bonding among each other, right? Okay, just write 1 or 2 lines and finish this point also. Bands are small communities usually consisting less than 100 people, right? Full stop. They could be called as mobile or nomadic. They could be called as mobile or nomadic to some extent, moving from one place, moving from one place to another, depending on the availability of resources. Members of band are usually related to each other through kinship, and kinship, K-I-N. It's not kingship, it's kinship. Kinship is a sort of, relationship, right? Which you cannot, define through any relationship as such, right? It's just, as per their use, right? It's a mutual bonding. What did you write? Kinship, based on kinship, and their division of labor. Their division of labor is based on age and sex. Right? Got the last point? Right? Next point. Right? The exchanges of goods is not based on rules, or like commercial exchanges. Next point. Did you get this point? They might be having exchanges, but there must not be any rule through which these were controlled, right? Because ultimately it was about the food resources, nothing else, right? So somehow there was a sort of mutual consensus, they were just sharing the food among each other. So there was no as such rule which was controlling the exchange, right? It was not like the agriculturist society also, because in agriculturist society there is a rule which is governing the exchanges normally, right? Because in agriculturist society also, if I am giving you wheat, right, in return you need to give me something, right? So that kind of equality, right? And it was based on a idea of equality, but that idea was not there at all, right? So somehow this is very important. Next point, there was no institution of formal government in fact there were no formal or permanent, there were no formal and permanent leaders. No permanent leaders. Full stop. even the muscle power was not deciding the leadership, was not deciding the leadership. Leadership. Because sometimes we have found that in some communities where the strength was slightly higher, more than 100 people, right, or where we find a more complex society, there also we don't find any as such evidence of any leader, right? And that is why it has also been said that the muscle power was never defining the power, right? And that is why we don't find the practice of this. Next point. The behavior of members of the group was regulated through customs, norms, customs and norms. Next point. I think this point is very clear, right? So, in fact, the paintings are talking about such kind of customs and practices. So, it seems that such kind of customs and norms were there, which were controlling the activities of the people. Next point, the normal assumption for such communities, is that they were continuously struggling for survival, and never had any leisure time. The material desires, just continue this sentence. The material desires of the Paleolithic people must have been relatively limited. And their technology never permitted them to store food beyond a limit. Which proves that they had leisure time for some creative activities. Got my point or not? right? Normally there's an assumption, right? And as per that assumption, we normally believe कि these people must have been, struggling a lot for the survival. Every time they had to, find the food, and they had to collect the food, and these kind of things were repeatedly done by them, and somehow they were just struggling for the survival. So that was the normal assumption we had. And once we just found, those sort of, I mean to say, those material remains of these people, right? So normally we assume that they must be having these kind of life, right? But over the period when the ethnographic studies started from this, these kind of people, then it has been, assumed, this is not true, and in fact these people must be having some leisure time, right? What is the point? Because they are saying, look, their technology was very limited, right? And that is why they could not store the food. That was the only, I mean to say, a requirement for them, and somehow they could not store it. As the tendency what we people are having right now, so we people always want to save money all the time, right? Because if we are storing money, right now we are storing money, right? We are not storing food, right? So we are storing money, and if any crisis is there, in that case storing food also, right? So if we, now what is the tendency right now? And in fact, this is one of the biggest limitation of history also, because we people cannot go beyond the culture in which we live, right? So in this particular culture, we have this tendency to store more and more, right? If there's 1 lakh in my account, so I'll try to make it 1 crore, right? If 1 crore is there, I'll try to make it 10 crores, right? And if 10 crore is there, crores are there in my account, so definitely I'll be very happy just by seeing that, and that's sort of different, but somehow, so they just try to understand their mentality. They try to apply the same idea, and they thought that they must be, trying to collect more and more food, right? They were just trying to collect more and more, store more and more, food. But somehow you need to understand their limitation, because they could not collect it for a longer period, and that is why they would have, they would not have tried to collect the food stuff for the longer days, and that is why they did have the spare times. And that is why we'll find those creative activities specifically on the walls of the cave, right, or the petroglyphs, right? So we do somehow, now there's a different conclusion which has been given. These people had lots of extra time, because once they have stored some good food, right, and then they had time, and in fact they used to chat among each other, they used to convey some ideas among each other, they used to make the paintings, and might be other things. In fact, if they would have come up with certain rituals and some certain other things, so these are also part of creativity. Because if you have started imagining like the rituals and some other things, so it means that they had certain creativity, and in fact the creativity shows that very clearly shows that they had certain leisure time, and that is where they would have been doing these kind of things, right? Okay, fine.
So language also discovered. So language also discovered.
Well, we don't know, but for chatting you don't need always language. Silent language. Sound, or as the animals are communicating among each other, or we can say the expressions and some other things, right? So they might be communicating. We cannot say much about that, right? Okay, fine. Right takes point. They were completely dependent. Next point, they were completely dependent on hunting and gathering for survival. Which is normally assumed inefficient, normally assumed as inefficient mode of subsistence. Mode of subsistence. Mode of subsistence. That is why it can be assumed that they would not have tried to exploit the environment or the natural resources and might have tried for the preservation of such resources. I think it's an easy point, it's clear to understand, right? So in fact the modern ethnographers are very clearly showing कि look, basically the tendency that what we people are having towards natural resources, they must not be having that sort of tendency, because they are saying कि now we have lots of alternatives, but somehow these people did not have much alternatives, and that is why what they were doing, they would have never tried to exploit the resources, and most of the time they would have tried to preserve the resources, and that is why in a very cautious way they would have been exploiting the resources. So that is one of the tendency which have been noticed among such communities, right? Next point. Instead of hunting, gathering might be the most efficient way of survival. Just wait for a moment. I hope you must be knowing about the scenario which is there in the forest, right? The lion or the tiger, they don't eat every day. That you must be knowing. They are eating normally after 4 days, 5 days. That is the common pattern that could be seen in forest. So if hunting would be the most important economic pattern of their survival, in that case definitely they would not be getting food every day, right? So now it has been assumed it was gathering which was most important, right? But somehow just see the mentality of the people, but even though they are putting hunting first and gathering second, right? It should be called as gathering and hunting community, but rather it has been always called as hunting and gathering community. Why?
Sir, first we need to hunt, then only we can gather.
No.
Without hunting, how can we gather anything?
फल को भी हंट करते हो क्या यार? फ्रूट्स को भी हंट करते हैं क्या हम? हाँ, तो मैंने क्यों शुरू में ही initially only I just told you that normally they prefer those areas where the animals are there, and apart from that some food stuff is there, fruits and some other forest stuff is also there, so that cannot be said. So they were basically, once I say gathering, so basically they were collecting some forest products, right? Fruits and some leaves and some other things. So these are the things which were consumed, and they were mostly relying on these stuff, right? Why? Because it is not only assumption, right? It is not only an assumption, because once we have analyzed the skeletons and their teeth pattern, so very easily it could be said that they were not regularly consuming the meat, right? They were consuming the fruits and some other things, because if they would have been consuming meat every day, so their teeth pattern would be completely different, right? So that is why it has been assumed that no, they were consuming the forest products, right, or the non-meat products basically. But even though we have put gathering in second position and hunting in first, can you give me any reason for that? Sorry? Okay. It could be presented in an alternative way also. हाँ
Agriculture was not there.
ये सब तुक्का हो गया. अब बहुत, दिस अ वेरी सिंपल रीजन फॉर दैट. हंटिंग वाज डन बाय male and the gathering was done by, that's it, very simple reason is it. That is why hunting has been put in the first position and gathering was second, because this name was not given by those people, this name was given by modern day historian. So somehow it shows the mentality of the male dominant society. Write it. Right? What did you write?
Instead of hunting and gathering might the most efficient ways.
Right. But even though hunting has been given more weightage and gathering is neglected, this conclusion has important this conclusion has important implications for understanding subsistent pattern as well as gender roles and relations in Paleolithic society.
So gender
roles and relation in Paleolithic societies. In most of such communities, men used to hunt and women used to gather food. Next point.
So when female used to gather food, this shows that it was a patriarchal society.
नहीं, ये कैसे पता चलेगा?
Male to more active थे.
नहीं, ये तो आप patriarchal society तो आप बता रहे हैं. They did not have any as such norms. The only thing that you need to, let me tell you one thing very simply, that idea we are going to imply again, right? There's a family, right? And in that family you'll find that the husband is earning, wife is not earning, right? So who is powerful in the family? There's a family, right? Husband is earning, wife is also, earning equally. So who is powerful? Huh? Normally decisions are taken by both. If wife is earning, right? Because if the wife is earning, so definitely she is also contributing. Maybe what you are saying, that might be to some extent correct. I do accept your point. But you now imagine it her. But definitely the lady in this family would be important as compared to the first family, right? Now you imagine the third family. The wife is earning, the husband is not earning at all. So who is dominant? Right? I hope you might have seen so many such families where the wife is beating the husband.
Yes, sir, to some extent.
Huh?
Case भी होने लगे हैं.
होने लगे हैं ना? In what families these kind of cases are taking place? You might have noticed one thing. I teach society, and that is why I need to notice these kind of things. You'll find that those families were normally, basically I have noticed, for those families, basically those families, such as the lady which is working working the domestic, doing the domestic works in my my place. So somehow I noticed in such families these kind of cases are very common. That husband is not doing anything, and the husband is asking for money as well from the wife just to drink, right? And very commonly I have seen that the wives are beating their husbands also, right? So look, there is a very common thing what I am trying to convey you. As per your contribution to the economy, your power, your power is being decided, right? Your power is being decided as per your contribution to the economy. And this is, as I told you, this is not implied only to, this particular phase. I hope you all know that during the early Vedic period, the women were powerful. They had good status because Rig Veda talks about lots of power for the women. They were participant in the political organizations. They were participant in the rituals, whatever the rituals were there, right? So they were equally powerful. Even though in most of the poetries or the hymns we find that they were demanding for the sun child, there is reason for that because ultimately they had lots of fights among the clans and the communities, right? And that is why they were asking for the sun child. But even though women are important, because there were so many things. These are, I'm just giving you some, major examples. If you imagine the present situation, if the girl is not getting married, right? If your sister is not getting married, so it is very much possible that it is not your father who is very much tense. It is the neighbor who is more tense. I hope you might have noticed this kind of, right? So sometimes this is becoming a problem for the neighbors and for the village or for your, society. Okay, she got 30, I mean, she has now turned into 30 and she hasn't, she's not married yet, right? So these kind of questions are. So in Rig Veda, why I'm giving you this example? Because in Rig Veda, we do find so many such examples of women, those who are not married. And you won't find a single at such reference where they have been perceived as a bad omen. She is 30 and she hasn't, she is not married yet, right? So we find so many such cases of women, those who decided not to marry, and the society was treating them very, respectively, right? So there were so many such cases. We can discuss about those, cases or the instances while doing this early Vedic period. Fine. So women were, equally powerful or equally important. Now, what happened in the later Vedic period? This question sometimes comes into mind. So what happened in the later Vedic period that they had to lose their strength and power during this, a later period? Very simple reason is there. In the early Vedic society was a pastoralist society. That you must be knowing, right? And if it was a pastoralist society, so basically the male part of the society used to do pastoralism. वो लेके जानवर को जाते थे, वो खिलाते थे. But they did not eat the animals. They definitely used the dairy products, but they were not using the meat only. They were consuming some rice and wheat also. So who were producing rice and wheat? Women. So women were contributing equally in the economy. They were respected properly. In the later Vedic period, the situation got completely changed. Now agriculture became important. And there were some fundamental reasons also because of the replacement of the women. Why? Because they were moving towards the upper Gangetic plains. So upper Gangetic plains mean soft soil. Soft soil means if you are applying, if you are using the plows here, that is getting deeper into the earth. Now it is becoming slightly tough for the women to pull it. They got replaced by male, right? So now they are confined to the household works. And with respect to that, you'll find that their status is getting down. So these are the things which could be applied in throughout the history, right? Whenever they are losing their part, role in economy, they are losing their position in society, right? Okay. Next point. The artistic, social, and cultic implications of some of the cultic implications of some of the specimens of Paleolithic art could be also seen which shows their observation comma, certain rituals being followed by them. Their beliefs, etc. Their beliefs, etc. Right? Sentence is incorrect. No. Sorry? That's it, right? That is the life phase of the Paleolithic people, right? So now any such question is there, ultimately these are the points that you need to include in your answer, right? So now we are left with the painting, right? So now what we are going to do, instead of doing the painting right now, we'll cover the Mesolithic society and Neolithic society, and then we'll try to see the paintings in a continuity. Got my point? The Paleolithic painting, the Mesolithic painting and the Neolithic painting, that we can make out the differences among them, right? So in tomorrow's class, the next class, I'll just cover the Mesolithic society. In fact, the Mesolithic society is not very important. More or less we'll find the continuation of the same sort of things, because somehow the inclusion of pastelism did not get much changes into society, right? And more or less we'll find the continuation of same society. So the question won't be asked on the life phase of the Mesolithic society. Yes, there are certain changes in the settlement pattern, right? And what are the changes that could be seen in the settlement pattern? Now they are coming slightly closer to the water bodies. That's the only change that could be seen. And there's some other things. In fact, if I'm discussing it right now, so if there are some other things that could be noticed, right? Gradually you'll find the population was increasing. So they were actually spreading, right? Expanding. They were expanding, the first change. And the second change, right? There was certain tool, the behavior or their tool requirement also got changed, right? Because of that, they started preferring at least those areas where the big stones were not available. Some small, stones were available. So they have started preferring such kind of areas also, right? And the third thing, as I told you, the water bodies, right? So yes, the water bodies became important for them, because now it is not only about them, and at the same, so some water could not have, satisfied them. So now they needed some bigger bodies of water, because now it is about animals also, right? So now what happened? Definitely these people would have, preferred to be closer to the water bodies, right? And of course their life is becoming simple also. How come? Because if once they have started, having animals with them, so definitely now the life or the food was not, what was not that much bigger challenge to them, right? So somehow it becomes simpler. So these are the normal changes that could be seen during this particular period. So even in the settlement pattern, we can just talk about these points, as mostly we'll find the settlements on the same areas that we have discussed. So in fact, there's not much to be discussed for the period, but yes, there's one area where you find some broader changes, and that is painting. Right? In painting you'll find some new technologies and new sort of styles are coming, and somehow that must be analyzed. So it is only the painting which must be emphasized, and definitely there are a few topics that we need to do in the Neolithic period, right? So in the next class we'll just finish this Neolithic, and we'll hopefully finish this also, the painting also, right? So see you on Monday, right? Can go through the notes that you have, and in fact they'll find a brief idea. In fact, I have just summarized it, but somehow you can get a brief idea of those things, basically the settlements, right? So the places and some other features have been discussed. So at least the settlement part that you can notice from there, and art you're not supposed to do right now. So you can go for the Paleolithic settlements and the Mesolithic settlements. Let me finish the Neolithic and then you can go for Neolithic, right? करेंगे चिंता नहीं, वो मैप बहुत आइडियल नहीं है जो उसमें है ना, ठीक है, नहीं उस क्लियर नहीं है, और वो बहुत वो भी साइंटिफिक करेक्ट भी नहीं है साइंटिफिकली. सॉरी, उसमें साइंस बहुत है भी, यू डोंट नीड टू कवर दैट मच. leave the sites completely. I just told you, completely rely on me for the sites also, right? Once we'll begin, I'll just continue with, those sites. And in fact, we have to just cover the ancient sites, right? So I'll begin after this Neolithic. So I'll just, get you the map, notes of the map, and then I'll begin with that notes. But we'll do it regularly, and you won't have any problem. But at least you can have rough ideas. The way I just, I was telling you, okay, this is okay. The, what land? There was exactly the Potwar area, then the Son Valley, Belan Valley, Narmada Valley, Tungabhadra Valley. In that we just remember the sum of the year. Roughly there should be an idea of the sites, right? That's it, nothing else.